I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story, because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.
When we are hit with a personal tragedy of some sort, a very, very large percentage of us are going to get a message like that one day. You only have this much time. And for those of us who go out a much faster way, a better way, a smoother way, we still will know people who will face that. Everybody knows somebody who has faced it, and we know people who will face it. So when people are hit with a personal tragedy of some sort, it doesn't have to be about your own demise. It can be about someone close to you. It can be all kinds of things. But what are our feelings when we are hit with something like that?
Despair.
Despair. What else?
Disbelief.
Disbelief. You can't believe that it's happening to me. What else?
Anger.
Anger. Well, you can pretty much go through the 5 steps of grief. Everybody will go through those things to some degree, and maybe some combined or different order, but we all go through those things when personal tragedy hits. Let me ask, do you remember the name Richard Jewell? Does that name ring a bell? A couple of heads nodding yes. Do you remember where you recall that name? Atlanta, 1996. The Olympics in Atlanta, where the bomb went off and killed a couple people and wounded over 100 people. Richard Jewell was the security guard who, on the day that happened, was proclaimed a hero because he saw the backpack that had the bomb in it. He alerted the authorities and scurried around, clearing the area, getting people away from it, and actually saved, they know, more than 20 lives just through his actions of a quick response to what he saw. However, 3 days later, there was a report in the newspaper attributed to an anonymous source that Richard Jewell was the prime suspect in the case. So Richard Jewell was falsely accused, as it turns out, because 3 months later, it was determined that, no, he had absolutely nothing to do with it. He was a hero after all. 3 months of being the bomber in the eyes of the people because he was accused by an anonymous source in a newspaper article. How do you think Richard Jewell felt? Because he knew that he was innocent, but he was now being proclaimed across the country as this mad bomber who killed innocent people and injured a lot of innocent people in Atlanta. How did he feel?
He was devastated.
Devastated. It's going to be the same kind of feeling, the same despair, same hopelessness, the same everything that you feel in that first situation, you're going to feel here too, aren't you? Can't believe that it's happening to me. His situation in particular, he was a hero. He was hired as a security guard. He did his job very well. He saw something suspicious, acted quickly on it, saved a bunch of people, and now he's proclaimed an evil, evil person. During that time, what do his friends think? Friends and family. Probably supportive in many ways, but always the questions now in the back of the mind. I'm wondering, could he really do that? Could that really be? And then maybe even going farther than that. Well, I could see that he might do that. But the feelings are going to be pretty much the same, aren't they? Falsely accused. Have you ever been falsely accused? Oh, you have. Absolutely. Your parents falsely accused you of something, and you also got away with a lot of stuff, didn't you? And maybe even got the blame shifted to a sibling. See, we've all done that too, haven't we? But we've been falsely accused, and we kind of know how it feels. For most of us, the things of which we've been falsely accused have been minor things. Did you eat that candy bar? You know, that kind of stuff. It was not a major deal for us. But on occasion, something comes along where we are falsely accused, and it is a major deal. Can you imagine in a family, close family, everybody gets along very well, but one brother marries a woman, they welcome her in the family and everything, but she's a little different. One brother tells another, you really probably shouldn't have married her, but he does, and they go on, they have some children, and then she divorces him. Turns out that every family was kind of right about her. She was different and a little wild, and so she divorces the one brother. Now, you can imagine situations like that because you probably have seen situations like that. Maybe not your family, but in families. That kind of thing happens. But now, the woman becomes vindictive. And so she says about her ex-husband's brother that he babysat with our young children last year, and he molested our 8-year-old girl. Now, that's an accusation, and assume it has absolutely no truth to it whatsoever. But because he babysat for this 8-year-old and an infant, who are the witnesses? So all Mama has to do is to get the daughter to say, he did this, he did that. Now, how is the brother going to deal with that? He's been accused of one of the most horrible crimes there is, molesting a child. So in the eyes of much of the world, he is a child molester, isn't he? Right out of the gate. That's who he is. He is a child molester. How do you defend yourself? There are all kinds of ways that any of us could be falsely accused of something tomorrow. And it could be a tragic event in our lives. Let's suppose that you go a step farther and not only are you falsely accused, but you're convicted of the crime. Wrongly convicted because you're convicted of something that you didn't do. Tell me now, how are you going to feel? Well, you can remember even as a child when you were falsely accused of eating that candy bar or doing that thing. It was a minor thing. And your parents actually believed that you did it. So your sibling accused you of it, and your parents were convinced that you did it. Falsely convicted, because that's all conviction is, isn't it? I mean, a conviction is somebody's convinced that you did it. You've been convicted by them. How do you feel?
Hopeless.
Hopeless. It is a hopeless kind of feeling, isn't it? Because the people who should believe you don't believe you. Scary, scary stuff. So why do people lose hope? Because in those situations, one of the things that can happen is a person can lose hope. Why do people lose hope?
They don't see a way out.
Don't see a way out. I mean, if we are falsely accused, if we're falsely convicted, if we have a tragic event in our lives, and we just may not see a way to get out of this, there may not be any hope, anything out there that we see that we can grab a hold of and get pulled out of this mess that we're in. And it's a hopeless, hopeless feeling. Nothing out there is going to allow us to survive this particular event. Now, when a person does lose all hope, you can be in a situation, not lose all hope. You can feel kind of down and go through all those things, but not lose all hope. You still have some hope and you're holding on and you're building it back, and we'll get to that in a moment. But when you get to the point where there is no hope, it is hopeless, what happens to that person? Depression is there. It's a very sad state, isn't it?
Suicidal.
And many times it becomes suicidal, absolutely right. So we can lose the hope, get to the point where there's just no reason to go on. And that can happen from any of these events. But in the event that we're suffering unjustly, that is something that's happened to us that we just didn't deserve, being innocent of something and accused of it and convicted of it, who deserves that? We all have done enough things for which we're guilty, and we should be convicted. Some of us more serious things than others. But we have all done things like that, haven't we? We can understand when that happens. Yes, I messed up, I did this, and so I'm paying the price for that. But when you are totally innocent of that thing of which you are being accused and of which you're being wrongly convicted, that's pretty hard to take. And you wonder if there's a way out of that. Well, the last one is, how is hope restored? If a person is losing hope, or have lost all hope, how can you get hope back again? Is there a way to restore hope? Now, let's assume it's not you that has lost all hope, but it's someone you know is close to you who has lost all hope. What can you do?
Reach out to them.
Reach out to them. In what kinds of ways?
Be there to listen to, encourage.
So be there, provide encouragement, They have to see somebody who has hope, don't they? To realize that, yes, it's still there. And particularly if it's somebody who's been through the kind of thing that they have been through. Always coming back to that, comfort with the comfort with which you've been comforted. And when we have been comforted with something, when we have brought out of something, then we are in an excellent position to help someone else come out of that. And we have an obligation to those people in there to share that with them and help them find what we have found. The movie, the clip that I'm going to show you, is about a man who was a banker who was accused of killing his wife and her lover. And not only accused, but convicted and given 2 back-to-back life sentences. Now, just stop there for a moment and put yourself in that situation. First of all, if the spouse was having an affair with someone, that would be devastating enough for anybody. Go to the next step. The spouse is killed. That would be more devastating. And then to be accused of that murder, and then to be convicted of that murder. This is spiraling out of control, isn't it? You're now going to jail, and the jail is Shawshank Prison. The movie is The Shawshank Redemption. It is rated R. It is a good movie. What I'm going to show you this morning is pretty gentle, and so I don't want you to get the wrong idea that the whole movie is like this. It's not. Some of it's pretty hard. This man, played by Timothy Robbins, Andy Dufresne, was a banker, wrongly convicted of murder, thrown into prison. With the lives that we've led, how would we do in prison with hardened criminals who've already spent 20 years in prison? How would we do? Wouldn't be very pleasant, would it? Are you hopeless yet? Main characters are Andy and his friend, played by Morgan Freeman, Red. Andy's a banker, so he uses his skills in finance to get ahead in prison. One of the things that he does is he builds up a prison library, and through that prison library helps a lot of men get their GEDs. He really does a lot of things for the other prisoners while he's in prison. The first scene is after he's in prison 10 years, and he's going to do something that's going to get him thrown in the hole for 2 weeks. Just to make sure we're all together, in the hole means being thrown into a very small cell that has no light coming in, except when they open the little door to slide your food in. There's a cot and a toilet, and that's it. Concrete block walls, no light. Can you imagine being in that for 2 weeks? He's going to do something that gets him thrown in the hole for 2 weeks. To understand Andy and the issue of hope in all this, you need to understand the kind of life he's been leading up to this point. But this is 10 years into a prison sentence that he did not earn.
I have no idea to this day what those 2 Italian ladies were singing about. Truth is, I don't want to know. Some things are best left unsaid. I like to think they were singing about something so beautiful it can't be expressed in words, and makes your heart ache because of it. I tell you, those voices soared, higher and farther than anybody in a great place dares to dream. It was like some beautiful bird flapped into our drab little cage and made those walls dissolve away. And for the briefest of moments, every last man at Shawshank felt free.
Open it up! Dufresne, open this door! Turn that off! I am warning you, Dufresne, turn that off!
There's something inside that they can't get to, that they can't touch. It's yours.
What are you talking about?
Hope.
Let me tell you something, my friend. Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. It's got no use on the inside. You better get used to that idea.
The second scene I'm going to show you is just after he comes out of the hole for a 2-month stint in the hole. That would kill most people, 2 months in the hole. The second scene is going to be after 20 years.
I don't think I could make it on the outside, Andy. I've been in here most of my life. I'm an institutional man now. It's like Brooks was.
Wow, you underestimate yourself.
I don't think so.
I guess it comes down to a simple choice, really. Get busy living, or get busy dying.
The third scene that I'm going to show is at the end of the movie where they're on the outside. They make it out. Red, serving a life sentence, finally gets parole after 40 years, I think, in prison.
I find I'm so excited I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement only a free man can feel. A free man at the start of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope.
Andy, convicted, serving 2 life sentences for a crime he did not commit, did not lose hope. Why would a man in that situation not lose hope? He had faith. Now, it's not particularly clear what that is, faith in, but he has some confidence, doesn't he? I mean, through the whole thing that you see here and through the whole movie, you see that there is a confidence, an expectation that something positive is going to happen.
Maybe that's all he had.
That's all it takes. It's hope, but he had hope. Another question I think is important for understanding the last question we asked at the beginning. How did Red get moved from this hope is a dangerous thing to all this, I hope this, I hope that, I hope that, I hope? I mean, obviously at the end of the movie, Red has hope, doesn't he? 20 years into the movie, I mean, there's no hope in Red. I mean, this thing is over. We're institutional men. We're going to die here. We can't survive on the outside. We have to have these walls. There's no place for us outside these walls. This is it. How did he get there?
We saw the hope in Andy, and
So you have someone who's demonstrating hope, demonstrating a life lived with hope, faith and hope. Why did Andy play that music over the loudspeaker? For Andy, that music meant something. I mean, it was really something to him. And he could have sat in that room and played that music for himself day after day after day because he was in a position where he could do that. But he didn't just do that. He turned that loudspeaker on and put that out for the whole camp. Why would he do that? And then to have the warden staring at him, mad at him for what he's done, demanding that he shut it off, and smiling at him while he turns it up. Anybody would know, and Andy certainly knew, that that would not end well. Why would he do it?
He wanted to give other people hope.
That's sharing this hope with others, to give other people hope. And the same reason that he would build the library, the same reason that he would help men in the prison get their GEDs, the reason that he would help other people. Give hope to these men who had no hope. I want to look at a map first. Most of the action will happen initially most of it's right in here. That's in the heart of Israel. But remember that the Philistines occupy the coast of the Mediterranean. And Philistines at this time are the major enemy of the Jews. And the Philistines occupy that territory. Moab is on the east side of the Dead Sea. And this area right along the Dead Sea on the west side is the wilderness of Judea. Just a wilderness. We're going to talk about David being pursued by King Saul. So a little bit of background. David is anointed to be king. Several interesting things here. David is 25 years old. So when we get to David and Goliath, this is not a 14-year-old kid with a slingshot. This is a young man, David, 25 years old, when he's anointed to be king. Now, he's anointed to be king, but when God sends Samuel to anoint him, Samuel says, I don't know, if Saul finds out, he's going to kill me. Now, that's important to set the stage because Samuel knows Saul, and Saul would kill Samuel if he knew what Samuel was about to do. Keep in mind that we're getting a clear picture here of the character of Saul at this point in time. He would kill if he thought somebody was coming after his position of power. David is anointed to be king, but he's not told when he will be king. It's going to be 5 years from this point until the time when David is king. How good a you are waiting. If I came to you and I said, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to give you this new job. I'm going to promote you in 5 years. The first few words would be rather exciting, wouldn't they? The last ones would take a lot of that excitement away. David is anointed to be king. It's going to be 5 years. He's not told when he will be king. But he's anointed, and the Spirit comes upon him. The Holy Spirit comes on David at this point. So then we meet Saul, and we find that the Holy Spirit leaves Saul, and Saul is left with a troubling spirit. The problem with that is that Saul basically becomes insane. Someone suggests and has found out that if someone will play him some music, that will calm him down and get him back to a more normal state. Somebody knows that David is an expert on the lyre, so David's brought in to play music for Saul so that it will calm him in these troubled moments when he's in a bit of a turmoil. So David does that, and Saul loves David. I mean, that's what the scripture says. Saul loves David. I mean, wouldn't you? If somebody could ease your pain, soothe your troubled soul, you would love them. I mean, that would be wonderful. So if you're feeling pain, going through hard times, and somebody can help lift that burden away from you, that's wonderful. Well, then the David and Goliath event takes place. The Philistines are challenging the Israelites on their border, and Goliath comes forth, this huge man comes forth and challenges the Israelites, and nobody's willing to take up the challenge, and David comes by. And David says, I'll do it. And David goes against the giant Philistine with his huge sword, and David takes a slingshot. Not a little boy, he's a man. And he goes out with his slingshot and he kills Goliath. And takes Goliath's sword and chops off his head. Saul loved him before. Now Saul is really going to like this kid, right? He has saved the day, doing something, taking up a challenge that the rest of the Israelites would not take up. So David now is brought into the court. Can't go home now. I mean, you're here, buddy. We need you full time. And he's put over some men. And he continues to have success against the Philistines. Now, this is wonderful news. And Saul loves him, sees him as a benefactor to his rule. But then something happens. The people, of course, see what David's doing, and so they are singing, literally, singing David's praises. Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. And Saul's reaction to that is, well, they think David's 10 times better than I am. And that's a problem. So Saul's jealous. Now, that's the problem. So jealous Saul, one time in the court, while David's sitting there playing his instrument to soothe Saul, Saul picks up his spear and tries to nail him to the wall. You wonder where that phrase comes from? I'm going to nail you to the wall. That's what he intends to do. Take that spear and nail him to the wall. David gets away. It's pretty clear that things are going to be a little rugged here now. So he's really out of the court. He can't really go back in because of this situation. Saul doesn't like this, but Saul's just not going to let him in the court. He's not removing him from service. He's just taking him outside the court. He's going to let him continue to fight Philistines because he's really good at it. And so Saul now decides, here's a good way, though, to get rid of David. Michal, his daughter, is in love with David, so he says, I'll give her to David, and I'll just ask for a bride price of killing 100 Philistines. Now, he got away with getting Goliath. He's been together with his troops and fighting Philistines. That's all fine. But David, I want you to go out and kill 100 Philistines. That's your bride price, to get Michal, my daughter, as your wife. What this should remind you of is, remember with David and Bathsheba later on, David is going to put Uriah in harm's way with the intention of getting Uriah killed. Well, he just learned from Saul. Saul was putting David in harm's way in an effort to get him killed, and David learned to do it better. And he was effective in his little venture, whereas Saul failed, because David went out and did it. David went out and did it, was successful at it. His successes continued to grow. So then Saul says, well, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to get a little more serious about that. So he speaks to Jonathan and his servants and says, you need to go kill David. Stop for a moment. You're David. You've been anointed. The Holy Spirit's come upon you. The prophet has anointed you with oil. You're to be the next king of Israel. And now you've got the current king of Israel throwing a spear at you, doing things to try to get you killed. Does that promise seem to be fading a little bit? Or are you standing firm on that promise? Well, now he wants to hire a hitman. But one of the people that he asks is Jonathan. Jonathan has befriended David from the very beginning. And Jonathan persuades Saul to back off. He says, look, he's done nothing but good for you, so don't do this. So Saul, in one of his better moments, says, okay. And David is brought back into the court. So things are starting to look up now. David's back in the court, apparently in Saul's good graces, and everything should proceed well. Except Saul chunks the spear at him again. Misses again. And David leaves, goes home to his wife. Saul sends some people to stay outside the home to kill him when he comes out. His wife lets him out the window so that he can escape. So David escapes again from Saul. And now he's on the run. David calls Jonathan, says, what's going on? Jonathan says, okay, I'll go to the king for you and see what we can find out. Jonathan and David believe that they can get Saul to calm down again and let David come back. But instead, Saul throws his spear at his son Jonathan, trying to kill him. Why is that particularly weird? Jonathan is the son that Saul expects to be the next king. I mean, that's what a king expects, is that his oldest son will be the next king. And now he's even throwing his spear trying to kill that son. Saul has lost it. Yes, we're seeing that pretty clearly now, aren't we? Saul is out of it. This is now clear to David that there's no going back. David is officially on the run. Now, an interesting thing happens. David goes to a city in Philistia. David has determined it's not safe in Israel because the king of Israel is out to kill him. So he says, okay, I'll go over to the Philistines. Now, why is that possibly not a good idea? So David realizes it's not safe. And David then acts insane. In order to get them to leave him alone, he pretends to be insane until he can escape. David was, it would appear from what we read, and to me it appears, that David was kind of on his own when he chose this Gath as the city to escape to. And he made a mistake. And so I think there's a little bit of shake of confidence here on David when he goes off here and gets thrown into this mess. But it brings him back. It doesn't drive him away. It brings him to God. He goes into the wilderness and he goes all the way across Israel over to Moab. Remember, Moab's on the east side of the Dead Sea. So he's gone from near the Mediterranean to across the Dead Sea to Moab. And he takes his mother and father there and he says, "We're going to stay here and make sure they're safe until I get God's direction." David is now realizing, hey, wait a minute, I need to be focused here. I need to do what God wants me to do. And he says, as soon as I get God's direction, then we'll move. Then a prophet says, you need to go back into Judea. So he goes back over into the wilderness now. So he goes into the wilderness, and that's where he is, in the wilderness, still trying to stay away from Saul so Saul doesn't kill him until God determines it's the right time for him to be the king. Saul is chasing David, finds out he's down here, and so then he accuses his servants of conspiring against him. Everybody's conspiring against me, all paranoid. Even my servants. You didn't tell me when Jonathan and David were getting together. You should have come to me and told me that. You didn't do that. And a beautiful statement in there, you didn't feel sorry for me. You don't feel sorry for me. Now, how many servants feel sorry for their king? Come on. But he expects them to have their world circulate around his. You didn't feel sorry for me. You didn't tell me about this. You're conspiring against me. And so somebody speaks up and says, well, there was a prophet over here that met with David and gave him advice. So they now calls the prophet in, Ahimelech, and said, you shouldn't be doing that. And the guy says, well, wait a minute. He's your son-in-law. He was a member of your court. Why shouldn't I? So Saul does what any good paranoid schizophrenic would do, and he has him killed. Not only does he have him killed, he has his entire family killed. He has 85 priests and all the men and women and children of the village killed. So Saul is a sick, sick man. And you're David running from this sick, sick man, being falsely accused of being his enemy, when you've done nothing but provide support for Saul. Well, let's go a step farther. The next event that takes place is in a city over about halfway between Jerusalem and the border of Philistia and Israel. So if you go southwest from there, about halfway is this city. And the Philistines were attacking it. Now, rightfully, King Saul should be over there with his soldiers defending this city. David finds out that the attack is going on, and David goes there with the men who have joined with him to defend the city, after he asked God if he should go over there and defend that city. So David now is getting in tune. He is really in tune with God. And God says, yes, go defend the city. David goes, saves the city. Saul finds out, Saul sends his troops. David, in the meantime, is down there, and he goes to God and says, is Saul going to come down here after us? God says, yes. He says, are the men of this city going to turn us over to Saul? And God says, yes. So David leaves. David, again, seeking God's guidance on what to do at every step of the way. So he leaves, goes back into the wilderness. Saul starts to catch up with him, almost captures him, and God has the Philistines attack another city, and Saul goes over to deal with that, and David escapes. Then, as soon as he gets that taken care of, Saul comes right back again, chasing David. He goes into a cave where David is hiding, only Saul goes in to relieve himself. And while he's in there, David has this opportunity to kill Saul. Now, be honest, if you had been David, after what David has gone through with Saul, would you have had the slightest inclination to kill Saul? David does not kill Saul. He cuts off the hem of his garment. Saul leaves. David stands out and shouts at him and says, I didn't do it because I'm not going to touch God's anointed. You are the king, and until God removes you from that position, you are God's chosen man to be king. So he doesn't do anything. David's hope is still there, isn't it? His confidence in God's promise that he will be the king when God determines it's time for him to be king. As God has revealed to him at each step of the way here, that he has his timing for all these events to happen. And he has his timing for David to do what he's going to do. The conclusion is from 1 Peter, this living hope that we have. We have been blessed with a living hope. And for a little while, we go through trials. We go through trials that test our faith. And one of the most severe trials that we can face is one where we have been falsely accused and falsely convicted of something we did not do. And it's so easy for any of us to be put into that position. It may happen to you, may never happen in your lifetime with anything serious, and I hope it never does. But it could. And if it does, how do we deal? That living hope is going to be essential for carrying forth. It is about faith. It is about trust. It is about steadfast obedience, as David was steadfastly obedient to God, listening to what God would have him to do, not to kill Saul when he had an opportunity, just because it would have been convenient for David to get this mess out of his way. God would take care of that. See, we are tempted many times when we are put in a tough spot, kind of bend the rules to ease this. We've been promised this, so anything I can do to make that promise come a little faster, come a little easier, and not have too much trouble in the way, I might bend a little rule over here in order to accomplish that. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. David could not take vengeance into his own hands. He had to leave that to God. It is a steadfast obedience, continuing to trust in God throughout the process, and then hold on to that confident expectation that the promise is going to be fulfilled. And that's what hope is. It is an expectation of something to take place, and it is a confidence that it will take place. It's going to happen. And if you don't have the expectation, or if you don't have the confidence that the expectation is going to take place, then your hope is not as strong, your faith is not as strong as you want it to be. And so we have to work at building that back up, and we need to work with people who have a stronger faith, have a stronger hope, that we may build ours up as well.
I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love.